Colocasia plants, like this one, are amazing tropical style plants with enormous leaves. But if you're like me and you like this style of plant but you don't have warm tropical winters, you have cold, wet winters like me, you're going to need to find ways to overwinter these plants to get them through those difficult months so that they thrive the following spring. In this video, I'm going to show you my preferred way of overwintering Colocasia plants, and I'll show you exactly how I get them through winter so that they bounce back and look amazing the following summer. Colocasias. This isn't how you want your plant to look, but it might be how your plant's going to look as autumn and winter approaches if you're growing tropical or half-hardy plants somewhere that has cold and wet winters. You'd much rather it looked like this. This one is Colocasia mojito, and it's looking much happier and healthier because of the way I've prepared it to overwinter. So I will demonstrate exactly what I've done now. Now this plant is Colocasia Redepmtion, or at least it was, and it was looking so happy outside in my UK tropical style garden all summer long. But it's been out there as September and October have rolled in, and we are approaching November quickly. We have had such heavy rain, so this soil is absolutely saturated. It's soaking wet. We've had cold nights, so the plant is now defoliated. It's dropping its leaves and it's preparing for dormancy. And we haven't yet had any frosts, so now is the perfect time to prepare this plant to be overwintered in a much better way. So let's knock it out of the pot and see what we're dealing with. Now, it's worth just saying that so many plant overwintering advice articles and videos like this depend entirely on the species of plant that you're growing, and that's no different with Colocasias. The majority of Colocasia are tender and they will need protection from cold, wet winters, but there are more resilient species and cultivars that you can grow. If you're looking for a low maintenance Colocasia that you can just leave outside all winter long, if you grow somewhere that has winters like the UK, then I'd recommend growing Colocasia Pink China. It's a fantastic hardy Colocasia that thrives outside in my garden, and I just leave it planted out in the ground all year long. Or Colocasia gagoliensis, I think it's called. It's a very difficult and long name, but that is a second reliably hardy Colocasia for countries that have winters like the UK, that drop below 0 degrees and that get a lot of rain. Okay, this at the moment is good, healthy rootstock. We've got some nice fat roots. We've got a lot of roots and it's in a well-drained compost mix. But if I squeeze it, see that water running out? That is exactly what we don't want, because all of that water around these roots is starving the roots of oxygen and air pockets in this soil. It's become absolutely flooded, and that's fine in summer. These plants love moisture. They love being like marginal aquatic plants even, but because they've got the heat of summer and the leaves are uptaking all of that water, there's airflow and it's absolutely fine. It's mimicking their natural environment, but Colocasias hate having wet feet in winter. So what are we going to do? We're going to use a well-drained potting mix, something like this. This is multi-purpose compost mixed with perlite, and that perlite is just going to create air pockets in the soil. So no matter how hard I try and compress it into one piece, it opens up again, and that is exactly what the roots want. This straight multi-purpose potting mix can be compressed into a ball. It holds its shape, and that compression is mimicking exactly how the roots feel when they're surrounded by water. They're going to drown, and it's going to cause rot. Now, I use perlite and multi-purpose as my potting mix for Colocasia plants. But if you're overwintering Colocasia plants and you've got horticultural grit or perhaps some fine gravel, that will work just as well. It's anything that creates air pockets in the soil. Now we can see there's 2 growing points on this Colocasia plant. So we're just going to gently tease them apart. I can feel how cold the compost is in my hands. So I'm right on the cusp of the time of year that I can do this. There we are. So now we have 2 plants. Now we don't want this old foliage, so we're going to cut it back to just above this growing point here, because that's where new leaves emerge. That's just going to prevent us having any excess herbaceous material that's just going to rot. And then I'm just going to tease away all of the soil that's in and around these roots, because it's that waterlogged soil. And you can already see there's smaller roots in and amongst these thick roots that have actually started to rot. But the key part of the plant, this corm here, looks a bit like a bulb at the base of the plant, is in good health. And I can tell that because as I press it, there is no soft bits, it's not started to rot. So we are okay. Now, it's a consistent part of this channel that I talk about when we're doing overwintering videos, is the key thing we need to avoid is water combined with cold. Because when water freezes, it expands, and that's going to cause the damage because there's water inside of every single plant cell. And as that water freezes, it ruptures the cell's walls, and that causes cell death, which in turn causes leaves to die, stems to die, and roots to die. So it's water combined with cold that we want to avoid. Now I've got the majority of that compost away from the root zone. I'll just do this one quickly. Again, just picking it out, trying not to break too many roots. Get that compressed bit away. And again, this corm is in good health. Now a corm is a plant's natural way of storing energy in the form of starch and sugars underground. So when all of the top herbaceous material dies in winter, colocasias become dormant, and they've got all this energy here so that when the conditions are right in spring, there is enough energy stored here to push up new leaves and the plants can start photosynthesizing and feeding themselves again. But how do we get them through winter? So I'll show two ways. One, you can keep them like this. You can cut the roots back, cut that back a bit further, and you're keeping it almost like a bulb, how you would buy bulbs at garden centres or in shops. And colocasias will store this way, so long as you keep them frost-free and don't allow them to dry completely out into crisp. Storing them out of soil, for me, although it works, is sort of against nature's way. Now, although you can overwinter colocasia plants by keeping the corm above ground, keeping it relatively dry, and then planting it back out in spring, I found it to be somewhat reliable, but not as reliable as my next method. These underground parts of the plant are never meant to be above ground, so that brings me onto my second way of storing colocasias, and that is simply using this well-drained potting mix, which is nice and dry. It's not wet compost, and potting my colocasias up. Now it's worth noting that colocasia plants won't actively be growing in winter if you're keeping them down at about 5 degrees Celsius. So you don't need to use fresh potting mix. If you've got some old potting mix that you've knocked out of other pots and it's pest free and it's dry, it should be absolutely fine for overwintering your colocasia plants because they don't need nutrients in the soil if they're not actively pushing up fresh new leaves all the time. I actually like keeping a bucket of old compost through the summer months because I know I'm going to need some in winter to pot up things like my banana plants, my colocasia plants, and anything that needs just a dry potting mix to get it through the winter months. Now I'm just gently firming that nice open compost in and around the colocasia roots, and that is job done. This colocasia now has all of its roots, all of that soaked compost is gone. The roots are protected from drying out because they're underground, exactly where they should be, nature's way. We've got the beginnings of one new leaf ready to pop out here. So all I've got to do now is store this pot somewhere frost-free. I'm going to keep it above 5 degrees Celsius, and I will probably water it once every 4 to 6 weeks, just a light watering. Now, why am I watering it if I'm saying that we want to avoid moisture in winter? Although we want to avoid moisture, we don't want the plant to completely dry out. This is still a living plant, even if we're sort of pushing it into semi-dormancy. So by watering it once every 4 to 6 weeks, it's just providing enough moisture for the roots to uptake and keep the corm alive, and it might potentially push out a new leaf or two over the winter period, but it's definitely not going to be growing at the rate that colocasias grow in summer. And that's it. Now there's a couple of ways that I like to keep my colocasia plants above 5 degrees Celsius in those cold winter months. The first is just to bring them into this greenhouse. Now this is just a standard domestic 8-foot by 6-foot greenhouse. I've got a small electric heater in here, and because it's a small space, it doesn't cost masses of money to heat it. I've also got the bubble wrap for insulation so that that heat isn't just escaping through the glass panels. You could also use just a heat mat. that you can buy cheaply online and just sit the pots on top of that heat mat, and it's going to keep that root zone area nice and warm. It's going to prevent any cold damage. But if you don't have any of that equipment, you don't have the greenhouse, that's fine. If you've got a sunny windowsill, whether it's in your home or in a garage or in a shed, that should be absolutely perfect, because you don't often find ice moving into those areas, unless of course you're growing these plants somewhere that gets snow for months on end. Then perhaps your shed and garage might get a bit cooler. So bring them into your home, because most of us are heating our homes above freezing in those cold winter months. This is my favourite way to overwinter Colocasia plants. And here's another, and you can see this one I did a short while ago, maybe 4 weeks ago. Brought it in, split off a young plant, put it into a well-drained mix where I can control the moisture in the root zone, and it's looking much, much happier and healthier. And this has stayed above 5 degrees Celsius, and it will do all winter long. This really is the most reliable way that I've found to overwinter Colocasia plants. For me, in my UK garden. Now, if you're in any part of the world that has cold and wet winters, this method is probably going to help you out. So I wish you the best of luck with overwintering your Colocasia plants, and thank you so much for watching this video. Now, please hit subscribe if you've enjoyed it, and feel free to post any of your plant winter care questions over on our community forum at growparadise.social, where there are people with gardens all over the world who love growing the same sort of plants as you. So join the community, we'd love to have you there. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next one.